The sun had begun its slow descent over the Pacific, painting the sky in streaks of molten gold and bruised purple. Major Ryan "Hawk" Carter adjusted his helmet, the reflections of the cockpit instruments dancing across his visor. He had flown thousands of hours over hostile terrain and open seas, but there was a different kind of pressure in the air today, the quiet hum of anticipation, like the calm before a storm. He was alone in the F-15 Eagle, cruising at 30,000 feet, scanning the horizon for any irregularities, when his radio crackled sharply. The sharp, panicked voice sent a shiver down his spine. "Mayday, Mayday. Flight 712, engine fire, cabin decompression, 30,000 feet. We need immediate assistance." Hawk froze. Flight 712 was a commercial airliner filled with civilians, 164 souls, terrified and at the mercy of fate. His training kicked in instantly. Calm, precise, unrelenting. But beneath the stoicism was a surge of something primal. Fear, yes, but the fear of failing when lives depended on him. He gripped the controls tighter. Lightning streaked across the horizon, the storm already thickening over the flight path of the doomed airliner. Hawk could see its silhouette in the distance, smoke trailing from the right engine, twisting like a wounded serpent in the dying light. He keyed his mic. "Flight 712, this is Major Carter. I'm coming to your position. I need you to stay calm and maintain altitude if possible. Help is on the way." His voice was calm, almost soothing, but inside his mind raced through every possible scenario. The flight crew responded with gratitude, but panic was evident in every word, in every frantic breath. The cabin decompression alarms blared faintly over the comms, the sound amplified by the terror in the passengers' voices. Hawk knew the nearest rescue units would take 20 minutes to arrive, 20 minutes that could mean the difference between life and death. Every second counted. He toggled the controls, calculating wind speed, storm trajectory, and the fragile airframe of the airliner. He had trained for emergencies, but nothing could fully prepare someone for the responsibility of hundreds of lives hanging on a single decision. "I can't lose them, not on my watch," he thought. The storm wasn't just atmospheric, it was psychological. Hawk's training demanded precision, but the human element complicated everything. Pilots were panicked, passengers screaming, and the airliner was losing stability by the second. And yet, his mind filtered the chaos into actionable steps. He calculated a risky intercept course, one that would put him directly in the eye of the storm. The F-15's engines roared to life, cutting through turbulent air. Lightning crackled around him, reflecting off the sleek contours of his fighter jet. Hawk adjusted his heading, closing the distance to Flight 712. As he approached, he could see the panic etched on the pilots' faces through the cockpit camera feed. The airliner shuddered violently, the compromised engine trailing smoke like a dying ember in the storm's wrath. Hawk's training and instinct told him he had to get closer, dangerously close, to assist. He considered the unthinkable, using his F-15's powerful wake to stabilize the airliner long enough for its pilots to regain control. No manual, no simulator, no precedent. Just him, a fighter jet, and the fragile metal bird struggling against nature's fury. The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. One miscalculation and both planes could plummet into the dark, churning ocean below. He gritted his teeth, eyes narrowing behind his visor. "I can do this. I have to." Time became an abstraction. Seconds stretched and snapped in rapid succession. Hawk's breathing steadied, matching the rhythm of his pulse. He analyzed the airflow, adjusting pitch and throttle, closing in on Flight 712 with surgical precision. Every movement had to be exact, every command measured. "Flight 712, follow my lead. Do not deviate," he instructed, voice steady but commanding. "We're going to get through this." The pilots hesitated, terror evident, but desperation demanded trust. They followed his cues, every subtle adjustment of the control column mirrored in their actions. The airliner swayed precariously as they tried to match his rhythm, fighting both panic and physics. Hawk's eyes scanned the horizon for the incoming F-35 Escorts, their blips faint on the radar, still minutes away. For now, he was alone, completely alone, with the lives of 164 strangers tethered to his skill and judgment. The storm intensified, winds lashing against the fuselage, thunder roaring in deafening crescendos. Hawk maneuvered closer, every second increasing the danger. He could feel the turbulence rattling his own jet, shaking the cockpit with ferocity. But retreat wasn't an option. He thought of his own family for just a fraction of a second, his younger sister, who still called him every week. His father, a retired Air Force pilot who had taught him the meaning of duty. His mother, who had always feared for him but never doubted his courage. They're counting on me to be the best version of myself now, he reminded himself. Lightning illuminated the situation with brutal clarity. The airliner's engine flames twisted like angry serpents. Hawk adjusted his formation, positioning his F-15 just below and slightly behind the crippled plane. The wake would give the airliner a temporary lift, a cushion against the storm's fury. It was audacious, it was unprecedented, and it might just work. He radioed once more. "Flight 712, I've got you. Follow my wake, trust me. Every adjustment you make mirror mine. Hold tight." The pilots swallowed their fear. Their eyes locked on Hawk's jet through the cameras and viewport, clinging to the only hope in the storm. Passengers screamed, some crying, some praying. And above it all, Hawk remained focused, every fiber of his being tuned to the delicate dance of metal and wind. The storm seemed to sense their defiance, lashing harder, pushing them to the brink. Hawk's jet shuddered under the strain, the instruments flickering as lightning arcs painted the sky in violent white. One wrong move now, and the airliner and he could be lost forever. And then, for the briefest instant, time froze. Hawk's eyes locked on the cockpit of Flight 712. The pilots nodded ever so slightly. The connection, a silent agreement of trust, desperation, and hope, was formed. This is it, Hawk thought. No turning back. Either we survive together or none of us do. As he prepared to make the first of many dangerous maneuvers, the scene cuts to black, the storm raging. Flight 712 teetering on the edge of disaster, and Hawk, alone in the eye of chaos, staring down fate itself. Major Ryan Hawk, Carter's F-15 cut through the darkening sky like a predator stalking its prey, the roar of his engines barely audible over the deafening fury of the storm around him. Lightning flashed across the horizon, revealing the twisted, smoky silhouette of Flight 712, struggling to maintain altitude. He could almost see the panic etched on every face inside the airliner, even from 30,000 feet away. He adjusted his helmet mic, voice calm but commanding. "Flight 712, maintain heading 270. Mirror my maneuvers exactly. I'll guide you through this." From inside the airliner, the pilots were white-knuckled and wide-eyed. "Are you sure this is?" one of them started to ask. Hawk cut him off with a firm, unwavering tone. "No time for doubt, trust me." The F-15 surged ahead, weaving through gusts that could snap a plane like a toothpick. Hawk's eyes flicked to the radar. The storm's intensity was increasing faster than predicted. The tailwinds were twisting Flight 712's trajectory, throwing the plane into spins and stalls. The aircraft shuddered violently, and passengers screamed in terror. Hawk felt the jet vibrate beneath him. Every gust of wind was a reminder that the margin for error was zero. He calculated the angle of intercept down to fractions of a degree. His plan was audacious: fly directly beneath the crippled airliner, using the jet's powerful exhaust wake to stabilize the stricken plane long enough for its pilots to regain control. He had studied wake turbulence in simulators, but this was not a simulation. This was life, death, and raw physics all at once. Hawk took a deep breath and reminded himself of his training. His vision narrowed, the storm around him fading into peripheral awareness. Every sense was focused on the rhythm of Flight 712. The sway, the shudder, the way the fuselage responded to the wind. It was as though he was dancing with a giant, fragile bird caught in a tempest. He closed the distance. Lightning illuminated the airliner, revealing flames licking the fuselage from the right engine. The metal shuddered under every strike of wind, and Hawk's stomach twisted. One miscalculation, even by a fraction of a second, and the plane could spiral into a fatal nosedive. Flight 712, follow my lead, Hawk instructed, voice unwavering. You'll feel turbulence. Don't fight it. Let me carry you through. The pilots exchanged a tense glance, their hands flying across the controls. The passengers screamed, prayed, or froze entirely. The crew shouted instructions over the intercom, trying to calm the chaos, but even they couldn't hide the sheer terror. The plane rocked like a leaf in a hurricane, and every heart on board raced against the storm. Hawk edged closer, his jet a hair's breadth from the airliner's tail. The F-15's wake began to buffet Flight 712, pushing it slightly upward, stabilizing the descent just enough. Hawk adjusted throttle, yaw, and pitch, every movement precise, every decision critical. He glanced at the radar. F-35 Escorts were inbound but still 20 minutes away. By the time they reached him, the airliner could be destroyed and every passenger lost. Hawk's jaw clenched. He was on his own. The storm seemed almost sentient, lashing at him with renewed fury. Thunder roared like an angry god and rain pelted the canopy, reducing visibility to near zero. Hawk's eyes flicked to the altimeter. 28,500 feet. 28,200. The plane was losing altitude faster than he expected. He realized something terrifying. The right engine might fail completely at any moment. If that happened, Flight 712 would begin an uncontrollable descent, and the wake turbulence trick wouldn't be enough. He needed another plan, and fast. Hawk's mind raced. He remembered his emergency water landing training, performed countless times in simulators, never fully executed in real life. It was dangerous, almost impossible, but he had no choice. He had to prepare Flight 712's pilots for a ditching scenario over the bay, thousands of miles from shore. He toggled the mic again. Flight 712, listen carefully. You may need to perform a controlled water landing. Stay calm. Follow my instructions exactly. The cockpit of Flight 712 fell silent. The pilot's fear was palpable. Hawk could hear it in their breathing, feel it in the turbulence as they hesitated to make critical adjustments. He took a deep breath. Trust me, he said again. You're not going down today. The next maneuver required Hawk to angle the F-15 just beneath and slightly to the right of Flight 712, nudging it with the airflow. It was a technique so precise, so dangerous, that it had only been theorized in manuals, never performed at this scale or altitude. One slip, and the smaller F-15 could collide with the fuselage. One slip, and the airliner could roll into a fatal spin. Hawk's fingers tightened on the joystick. Sweat dripped inside his helmet. He advanced, the airframe shuddering violently with each gust. Lightning struck in the distance, illuminating the world in blinding white flashes. He adjusted his throttle, nudging the airliner's tail upward just enough. Inside the cabin of Flight 712, passengers clutched seats, gasped, and screamed. Hawk's voice cut through the terror like a lifeline. Steady, steady, follow my wake, hold her level. The airliner responded slowly, hesitantly. The pilots mirrored his movements inch by inch, stabilizing the once wild aircraft. Hawk's heart raced, knowing the storm wasn't finished. Every moment of calm was temporary, a fleeting pause before the next assault. He glanced up at the radar again. The F-35s were closer but still minutes away. Hawk's stomach twisted. The storm was unpredictable, the airliner was failing, and time was slipping like sand through his fingers. Then came the first real crisis. The right engine of Flight 712 sputtered violently, flames spitting from the nacelle. Smoke curled into the sky, dark and thick. Hawk's eyes widened. The engine could fail entirely any second. He radioed urgently. "Flight 712, prepare for full emergency procedures. I'm guiding you to the nearest safe landing zone. Do not panic." The pilots responded with tense, shaky acknowledgement. Hawk knew they were terrified, but he had to instill confidence. There was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. Every life on board depended on his skill, his courage, and the fragile bond forming between pilot and fighter pilot. Lightning struck closer now, illuminating the airliner and the storm-choked horizon. Hawk's F-15 sliced through the tempest, every adjustment a gamble, every movement critical. And then, just as the airliner's right wing began to dip dangerously, Hawk made a maneuver that would decide the fate of everyone on board. He angled the jet perfectly beneath Flight 712, using the airflow to lift the failing wing. The airliner steadied, the shuddering momentarily abated. Hawk exhaled sharply, realizing that this brief window of stability was their only chance to navigate the next obstacle, a sudden downdraft forming at the eye of the storm. As the storm roared around them, Hawk realized one terrifying truth. The next minute would determine whether 164 lives survived, or whether he would be forced to watch them fall into the churning ocean below. The screen of the story closes with Hawk's intense gaze, visor reflecting the lightning-lit chaos, sweat dripping from his brow, heart hammering. Below him, Flight 712 teetered on the edge of disaster. And for a single heart-stopping moment, the world hung in balance. Major Ryan "Hawk" Carter could feel the storm pressing down on him like a living entity, every bolt of lightning a warning, every gust of wind a challenge to his nerve. 30,000 feet above the Pacific, the sky had become a maelstrom of gray and black, with violent flashes illuminating the crippled Flight 712 ahead. The airliner shuddered violently, flames licking the right engine, smoke trailing like the tail of a dying comet. Hawk's pulse raced, but his movements remained precise, almost mechanical. His gloved hands danced across the controls, nudging, adjusting, correcting. The F-15 responded instantly, slicing through the storm with deadly grace. His entire being was focused on a single goal: stabilize the airliner long enough for its pilots to keep it in the air. He edged closer. The wake turbulence from his jet struck Flight 712's fuselage, lifting the right wing slightly. The airliner shuddered violently, passengers screaming, their fear palpable even through the radio. Hawk could hear snippets of panic, cries for family, prayers whispered through tears, shouts for guidance. Every soul on that plane was tethered to his skill. "I can't fail them, not now." Lightning flashed directly ahead, illuminating the water below. Hawk could see the waves churning violently, a dark, angry ocean ready to swallow them whole. There would be no room for error if they had to ditch. He toggled the mic. "Flight 712, listen carefully. I'm going to guide you to a safe water landing. It's going to be turbulent. Follow my instructions exactly. Trust me." The pilots were white-knuckled, fear etched into every line of their faces. "A water landing. Are you sure?" one stammered. Hawk's voice was unwavering, though inside his stomach coiled with tension. "Positive, I've done the calculations. We have one chance. I need you to mirror my movements exactly. Hold on." Hawk maneuvered the F-15 directly beneath the airliner again. This time he adjusted for the downdrafts, the storm pushing the plane downward with every gust. The right engine sputtered, then coughed violently. Flames spat higher. Hawk's stomach twisted. "It's now or never." He gave the signal, a sharp roll of his jet, just enough to nudge the airliner's wing upward, stabilizing it. The plane responded, shuddering but steadying. Hawk's eyes flicked to the radar. F-35 Escorts were still minutes away. He couldn't rely on them. He was the only lifeline these 164 people had. Thunder cracked overhead, closer than ever, illuminating the terror in the cockpit cameras. Hawk could see passengers pressed against the windows, faces pale and terrified. He whispered to himself, almost unheard, "You're going to make it, you have to." Then the real challenge hit. A rogue gust of wind, stronger than anything the meteorologists had predicted, slammed into Flight 712, twisting it violently. The fuselage tilted sharply, the left wing dipping dangerously. Panic erupted inside the airliner. Hawk's hands moved faster, pushing and pulling controls with split-second precision. He angled the jet beneath the left wing, using the wake to lift it back to level. For a moment the storm relented, the plane trembling but stable. Hawk exhaled sharply, feeling the brief release of tension, but he knew it wouldn't last. The right engine was failing, the fuel reading dangerously low. If it went out completely, Flight 712 would plummet, and there was no second chance. Hawk spoke firmly over the radio. "Prepare for partial power loss. We'll use glide procedures. Follow my cues." Inside Flight 712, the pilots nodded, white-knuckled hands dancing across the throttle and yoke. The cabin was chaos. Passengers screaming, flight attendants shouting instructions, alarms blaring in every corner. Yet amid the fear, a fragile trust had formed, the unknown fighter pilot guiding them through the impossible. The ocean below was a churning mass of dark waves. Hawk calculated the glide path, factoring wind speed, turbulence, and the plane's damaged state. Every second was critical. Miscalculate by a fraction, and hundreds of lives would be lost. He toggled the mic again, voice calm but urgent. "Stay steady. We're lining up with the bay. Follow me. Every adjustment counts. Do not panic." The pilots mirrored his movements, the plane responding to his guidance. The storm thrashed around them, lightning illuminating the scene in violent bursts. Hawk's F-15 cut through the tempest, circling beneath Flight 712, providing lift where needed, steadying it like a guardian angel in metal. And then it happened. The right engine sputtered and died completely. Smoke poured from the nacelle, flames licking higher. Hawk's stomach dropped. The plane tilted slightly, threatening to spin. "Flight 712, brace for impact. Glide slope is critical. Maintain level," Hawk shouted. The pilots obeyed, following his wake, hands shaking but determined. Passengers screamed, some crying, some clutching each other, eyes wide with terror. Hawk's mind was a storm of calculations, instincts, and gut feelings. Every movement, every adjustment had to be perfect. One mistake, one hesitation, and the ocean would claim them. The minutes stretched, each one an eternity. Hawk's F-15 and Flight 712 danced a deadly ballet, weaving through gusts, lightning, and panic. The plane was close to the bay now, the shoreline faintly visible through the sheets of rain and spray. Hawk felt the tension in his shoulders, the weight of responsibility pressing down like the storm itself. He gave the final instructions. "Keep her steady. Touch down just above the waves. Glide gently. We have a few hundred feet, don't overcorrect." Flight 712 responded. The pilots adjusted, trembling hands precise, following Hawk's lead to the letter. The nose dipped gently, the fuselage kissing the surface of the water. Spray erupted around the plane, but it held. Miraculously, it held. Hawk exhaled, a brief moment of relief washing over him. But the storm was not finished. Waves slammed against the fuselage, tossing the plane like a toy. Passengers screamed anew. Hawk's eyes flicked to the water. Rescue boats were still minutes away, and the survivors were at the mercy of the storm. He radioed urgently, "Stay on the slides, grab life vests. Help is on the way. Do not move until rescued." The pilots nodded, focusing on keeping the plane stable as it slowly came to rest. Hawk circled above, eyes scanning the waves, ensuring that debris or rogue waves didn't endanger anyone. Then, through the chaos, Hawk caught sight of approaching blips on the radar. The F-35 Escorts were finally closing in. He realized with a mixture of relief and curiosity that the pilots knew his call sign. That detail would matter later, but for now, it was irrelevant. All that mattered was survival. And as the first passengers scrambled onto lifeboats, water sloshing violently around them, Hawk felt a rare smile tug at his lips. They had made it, against impossible odds. Against nature, physics, and fear itself, they had survived. But the storm still raged. Hawk's heart was still hammering. He knew the ocean could swallow them all in an instant, that survival wasn't guaranteed until every soul was safe on solid deck. Major Ryan Hawk Carter's eyes were fixed on the horizon, though the storm obscured it with sheets of rain and jagged bolts of lightning. The dark, roiling ocean below stretched endlessly, waves like mountains tossed by fury itself. Flight 712, battered and trembling, followed his lead, its right engine dead, smoke curling like a sinister serpent into the storm. Hawk knew the real test had begun, guiding the stricken airliner to a controlled water landing, something few pilots had ever survived, much less attempted under such conditions. He adjusted his F-15 to hover slightly below and behind the airliner, his jet's wake pushing it just enough to counter the deadly roll of the fuselage. Thunder boomed overhead, the shockwaves rattling both aircraft. Hawk's visor reflected flashes of lightning, illuminating terrified passengers pressed to the windows and flight attendants clinging desperately to rails and seats. Flight 712, brace for descent, Hawk instructed. His voice was calm, unwavering, though his mind raced. Maintain heading, keep level, trust my wake, you will land in the bay. The pilots swallowed their fear. Their fingers danced across the yokes, mirroring Hawk's every move. The plane trembled violently with each gust, rolling perilously, its nose dipping dangerously. Hawk adjusted his throttle and rudder, nudging it upward, countering the natural tilt of the crippled right wing. He had only minutes, maybe less, before the storm would overwhelm them entirely. The ocean below churned like boiling black glass, every wave a potential tomb. Hawk's pulse pounded. He had executed simulated water landings countless times in training, but this was no simulator. Lives hung in the balance, 164 human lives, each dependent on his skill, focus, and courage. One mistake and it's over. A bolt of lightning struck the water nearby, illuminating the sheer scale of the waves. Hawk's stomach twisted. If Flight 712 descended too quickly, the impact would be catastrophic. Too slowly, and the wind could shear it apart. The calculations were instantaneous, precise, visceral. He spoke calmly into the radio again, grounding the pilots with each word. Right wing high, adjust 2 degrees. Lower descent rate slightly. You've got this. The airliner shuddered, responding to the guidance. Hawk's jaw tightened. One more adjustment and the glide slope would be perfect for impact. He adjusted again, the wake from his jet nudging the fuselage just enough. From inside Flight 712, the pilots could barely breathe. Every adjustment was life or death. The passengers screamed, prayed, and some had gone silent, paralyzed by terror. Hawk could feel their fear as if it were his own. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he didn't dare wipe it away. Every second counted. Then disaster threatened. The fuselage lurched violently to the right as a rogue gust hit, sending the plane toward a steep roll. Hawk reacted instantly, banking his F-15 beneath the tilt, the turbulent wake lifting the wing just enough to stabilize the plane. "Hold her steady, steady," Hawk shouted. His voice cut through the chaos, a lifeline tethering the pilots and passengers to survival. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the plane was level. Then he saw the next threat. The bow wave of the approaching storm swelled beneath them, a monstrous wall of water ready to engulf the airliner. Hawk had to time the descent perfectly. Too fast and the plane would slam into the waves. Too slow and they'd be caught in the next swell. Glide slope 27 degrees. Align with bay. Full attention now, Hawk commanded. His mind calculated every variable: wind speed, water turbulence, wing load, fuselage tilt, descent angle. Flight 712 responded, its movement hesitant but precise. Hawk's heart hammered. He could see passengers clinging to the seats, some crying, some silent in disbelief. The crew shouted instructions, directing people to life vests and emergency exits. Hawk's jaw set. Survival depended on order, on following instructions, but chaos still threatened at every turn. The plane descended further, skimming the tops of giant waves. Water sprayed over the fuselage, glass cracking from violent strikes. Hawk's eyes remained locked on the trajectory, adjusting throttle, pitch, and yaw with surgical precision. The final moment approached. The airliner had to touch the water at the right speed, the right angle on the first attempt. Failure meant instant catastrophe. Then came the most dangerous part. The nose began to dip too sharply. Hawk reacted instantly, banking the jet beneath it to push the tail upward via wake turbulence. The fuselage leveled just in time, but the right wing scraped water, sending a torrent over the plane. Passengers screamed. Flight attendants clutched anything stable, guiding terrified souls toward the exits. Hawk whispered under his breath, almost as a prayer, "Steady, steady, you can do this." The airliner touched down. The initial impact was violent but survivable. The fuselage slid across the churning waves, water lapping violently at the tires and belly. Hawk circled, guiding it through the turbulent bay, ensuring it didn't capsize or break apart. He radioed urgently. "Evacuate immediately, slides deployed, life vests on, stay calm." Passengers clambered into life rafts as waves tossed the plane like a toy. Flight attendants shouted, some crying, but their training guided them as much as Hawk's calm instructions. Families hugged, strangers held each other, and the first faint sense of relief began to replace panic. But Hawk's attention never wavered. The storm was still alive, still capable of taking everything in a heartbeat. He maneuvered the F-15 overhead, shielding survivors from debris and guiding rescue boats toward the floating rafts. He saw a child slipping from a raft. A hand shot out just in time to grab the frightened boy. Hawk's eyes narrowed, jaw set. Every second mattered. Minutes stretched like hours as Hawk coordinated the evacuation. The waves were still monstrous, the wind threatening to capsize lifeboats. And then, finally, the last passenger was safely in a raft. Hawk allowed himself a brief exhale, though he didn't relax. The survivors were alive but not yet safe. Rescue ships had to reach them before the storm could reclaim them. From the radar, Hawk glimpsed the incoming F-35 Escorts. Sleek, lethal, and fast, they were closing the distance, their pilots now aware of his call sign. But Hawk's role was far from over. He had to guide the survivors to solid rescue, shield them from the storm's fury, and maintain composure under the ever-present threat of disaster. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the bay in blinding white flashes. Hawk's F-15 cut through the storm, a guardian angel in metal and fire. He felt the weight of 164 lives on his shoulders and refused to falter. And as the first rescue boats approached the floating survivors, Hawk allowed himself the briefest of smiles. Against impossible odds, against nature and physics, against fear itself, they had survived. The storm hadn't relented. Its fury now seemed almost personal, a relentless, roaring beast intent on consuming anything in its path. Waves crashed against the partially submerged fuselage of Flight 712, tossing the aircraft like a rag doll. Wind whipped rain into his visor, and the thunderous roar of the storm made it impossible to hear anything over the cockpit intercom. Yet Major Ryan "Hawk" Carter remained focused, his eyes locked on the floating survivors scattered across the churning bay. He guided his F-15 above the water, circling the airliner and rafts with surgical precision, ensuring no debris or rogue wave endangered the survivors. Every movement was calculated. One misjudgment and a raft could capsize, or a child could be thrown into the icy, merciless sea. Hawk's gloved hands gripped the controls, knuckles white, sweat dripping into his eyes beneath the helmet. Below, passengers clung to rafts, floating debris and each other, some sobbing, some praying. Flight attendants shouted instructions over the roar of the wind and water, their own fear and exhaustion evident, yet still unwavering in their dedication to protect lives. Hawk's calm voice cut through the storm as best it could. "Keep your hands inside the raft. Hold tight, help is on the way." He glanced at the radar. The F-35 Escorts were closer now, cutting through the storm like silver arrows. But they weren't here yet. For the moment, he was still the sole guardian of 164 lives. Hawk's heart thumped as he calculated every next move. Each raft had to be guided toward the designated safe zone where rescue boats could retrieve the survivors. The ocean was unpredictable, and he knew it could claim lives in an instant. One lifeboat, carrying a group of elderly passengers, was being pulled toward a jagged piece of floating wreckage. Hawk reacted instantly, banking his jet to create a temporary wind shield, nudging the raft away from danger. He could see the fear on the faces of those inside. They glanced up at the F-15 overhead, the silhouette of metal against lightning flashes almost angelic in its presence. "Stay calm, trust me," Hawk muttered to himself, feeling the weight of their reliance. Another raft began drifting too far from the main group, caught in a cross-current. Hawk adjusted the jet, angling it to redirect the flow of water, guiding the raft back toward safety. His movements were precise, elegant, and terrifyingly dangerous. He was threading a needle in a storm that seemed intent on ripping apart everything in its path. Minutes passed like hours. The storm's intensity had not diminished. Waves slammed into rafts, tossing terrified passengers into freezing water. Hawk spotted a child slipping from a raft, water swallowing half of her small frame. Without hesitation, he banked sharply, using the jet's wake to push her back toward safety, and shouted over the comms, "Grab her, pull her in." A flight attendant reached out, pulling the trembling child aboard. Hawk exhaled, chest tightening with relief. One life saved, but there were still more. Hawk's attention flicked back to the partially submerged fuselage of Flight 712. Its rear section was breaking apart under the relentless pounding of waves. Some passengers had clung to debris, others floated free, relying solely on their life vests. Hawk guided the rafts toward the calmest part of the bay, using every bit of turbulence, every shifting wind gust, as a tool rather than an obstacle. He radioed for the final push. "All remaining survivors stay low, follow the largest wave ridge toward the safe zone, keep together." The F-35s finally arrived, cutting through the storm, their sleek forms a promise of support. Hawk watched them cover the perimeter, ensuring no debris drifted into the rescue zone and giving him a momentary reprieve. But his vigilance did not waver. He was still the one ensuring the link between the survivors and the arriving rescue teams. Then he spotted another danger. A lifeboat carrying a young family was drifting dangerously close to the wreckage of the plane's nose section. Hawk adjusted his trajectory, angling the F-15 to create a temporary wind barrier, holding the raft steady until the current shifted. He could see the parents clinging desperately to their children, faces pale and terrified. The relief on their eyes as they realized Hawk had controlled the situation for them was almost enough to bring him to his knees. Almost. Not yet, not until everyone is safe. The first rescue boat approached, slicing through the monstrous waves, carrying trained personnel ready to pull survivors aboard. Hawk guided each raft toward the boat, providing real-time adjustments. He could see the rescuers' faces reflecting awe as they realized the precision with which the survivors had been herded, all thanks to one pilot flying a jet above a stormy sea. One by one, the 164 passengers were loaded onto the boats. Hawk maintained his circling pattern, vigilant against rogue waves, shifting debris, and the storm itself. The roar of the ocean and wind was deafening, but his focus remained unbroken. He was still the guardian, the invisible hand ensuring no one was left behind. Finally, the last raft, carrying the last few stragglers, including a terrified elderly man and his granddaughter, reached the rescue boat. Hawk guided them into position, nudging the raft into alignment using subtle wake adjustments. The rescuers pulled them aboard, and Hawk felt a surge of relief unlike any he had ever experienced. He had done it. 164 lives had survived. Against impossible odds, against nature, physics, and fear itself, the people of Flight 712 had been saved. Yet even in that moment of triumph, Hawk's heart did not fully settle. The storm still raged, and he was still flying above a bay of survivors. The F-35s now flanked him, their pilots silently acknowledging his skill, but Hawk's mind remained alert. Rescue was underway, but he could not relax until every soul was secured. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene like a surreal painting, twisted metal, floating rafts, terrified passengers, and the sleek silhouette of Hawk's F-15 overhead, the storm raging around them all. It was a tableau of survival and courage. And then, through the crackle of comms, came the message that made Hawk freeze. A voice, calm, authoritative, almost reverent, spoke directly to him. "Major Carter, this is Strike Leader Vega of the F-35 Squadron. We've identified your call sign. We're in position to cover your exit." Hawk's pulse quickened. His call sign was classified. Not even the pilots knew it. Yet here they were, F-35 pilots who recognized him instantly, aware of his identity in the middle of one of the most daring rescues in history. The storm had not yet passed. The survivors were not yet ashore, and now Hawk realized there were questions and consequences that would follow this day. But for the first time, a flicker of recognition and understanding passed between him and the F-35 pilots above. Major Ryan "Hawk" Carter circled above the survivors, eyes scanning the bay, F-15 engines roaring over the storm's fury. The last of the passengers had been secured on rescue boats, floating amidst the churning waves. For a brief moment, he allowed himself the smallest exhale of relief, but it was short-lived. The voice from the F-35 comms crackled again, calm but edged with intensity. "Major Carter, Strike Leader Vega here. We know who you are. Call sign confirmed. You're cleared for extraction. Status report." Hawk froze in the cockpit, visor fogging slightly as adrenaline surged. Recognition of his call sign wasn't supposed to happen, not now, not in public. His identity was classified. Not even the Air Force rescue coordinators had this information. Only a handful of high-ranking officials in Strategic Command knew of the operations tied to his name. Hawk replied evenly, masking the tension. "Strike Leader Vega, survivors secured, all 164. Storm still active but contained within bay. Extraction needed for myself. ETA for evac. 5 minutes, maintain position, we've got your 6. Hawk's mind raced. Recognition in real time by a squadron in the middle of a classified operation posed serious questions. How had they known? Who else was listening? And more importantly, what were the implications for him and the survivors he had just saved? His F-15 adjusted into a holding pattern above the bay, circling carefully. The rescue boats were pulling survivors toward calmer waters, and the storm's fury was still relentless, rain lashing, waves hammering the hulls of the ships below. Hawk's thoughts returned to the passengers he had shepherded through death itself. Their fear, trust, and reliance on him had been absolute. One wrong move and they would have been lost forever. Now a new tension gnawed at him, the operational side of this rescue. The F-35 pilots knew his call sign, and that meant that the mission was no longer entirely clandestine. Hawk toggled the mic, voice calm, professional. "Strike Leader Vega, be advised, I am ready for extraction. Recommend immediate egress once we secure the perimeter and ensure the survivors are stable." "Copy, egress plan in place. ETA 3 minutes. Even as he spoke, Hawk's eyes swept the bay. The storm was not done. A rogue wave surged higher than any of the others, threatening one of the rafts still tethered to the rescue boat. Hawk banked sharply, placing his F-15 between the wave and the raft, creating a temporary wind buffer. The crew on board the raft reacted, stabilizing it just in time. Hawk's training, instincts, and nerve had saved 164 lives today, but now the stakes were personal. His mind flickered to the F-35 pilots above. Recognition of a classified call sign could only mean one thing. Someone high up was observing this rescue. An observation implied accountability and possibly danger. He took a deep breath and adjusted his heading, positioning for extraction. The storm was still hammering the bay, but Hawk was meticulous. Every adjustment of the F-15, every maneuver was precise. A final test of skill after a mission that had pushed him to his limits. Lightning illuminated the bay again, throwing the floating survivors into stark relief. He felt the weight of the day press down on him. Lives had been saved, but the storm was still alive, and his identity had just been exposed. Then came another transmission, this one closer, urgent. Major Carter, Strike Leader Vega, we're locking coordinates for extraction. Hold tight, prepare for rapid ascent. Hawk keyed the mic, responding with crisp professionalism. Understood, preparing for immediate egress. He banked slightly, adjusting his flight pattern. The F-35s flanked him, sleek and deadly, a visible assurance of backup. Their pilots had recognized his call sign and now operated as his escorts. But why? Hawk's mind turned over every possibility. The only people who should know his call sign were Strategic Command, not a tactical squadron in the midst of a rescue mission. He glanced down at the survivors, some still sobbing, some hugging each other, faces pale but alive. Hawk's chest tightened with emotion. These were lives he had personally saved, lives that trusted him entirely, even without knowing his full history. He thought of the parents, the children, the elderly. Every person had been at the mercy of one man and one fighter jet against a storm of almost supernatural force. A sudden lightning strike erupted close to the water, illuminating the bay in brilliant white. Hawk's F-15 cut through the storm, circling above the survivors, while the F-35s maintained perimeter control. One of the escorts transmitted. Major Carter, confirm extraction readiness. We're approaching optimal altitude for pickup. Hawk's jaw tightened. Extraction ready, standing by for command. Then unexpectedly, Vega's voice softened, almost personal, almost familiar. Major Carter, incredible work today. I didn't think 164 lives could be preserved in this storm. You're exceptional. Hawk felt a flicker of pride, quickly suppressed. Recognition for heroism was secondary. Operational security always came first. Thank you, Strike Leader. Focus on extraction. The F-35s guided him toward a calm corridor above the storm. The rain still lashed at his canopy, the wind buffeted his jet, but the path was clear. Hawk adjusted altitude, navigating carefully through the remaining turbulence. Each movement had to be flawless. One slip could send him spinning into the storm below. And then the storm's fury hit one final time. A rogue wind shear ripped across the bay, pushing the F-15 violently. Hawk countered instantly, banking sharply and using the jet's powerful engines to maintain stability. His pulse thundered in his ears. The storm, relentless until the very end, seemed determined to punish him for the lives he had saved. He toggled the mic. All units maintain position. Wind shear observed. Adjust accordingly. The F-35s flanked him, mirroring his every maneuver, protecting the corridor. The extraction point was near, but not guaranteed. Nature had made that much clear. Hawk's mind worked rapidly, calculating the final approach, monitoring altitude, airspeed, and wind patterns. Finally, the bay below was clear. The extraction helicopters were in position, hovering steadily above calmer waters. Hawk made his approach precise, calculated, every adjustment measured. He could feel the adrenaline and exhaustion clawing at him, but he forced focus. One wrong move now, after everything, could undo the day's miraculous efforts. As he prepared for the handoff, Vega transmitted, Major Carter, extraction corridor is clear. You are cleared for immediate pickup. Coordinates locked. Hawk responded crisply, Copy, commencing approach. The moment was tense, silent in a way only a storm could make silent. Every pilot, every crew member, every survivor below waited on the precipice of hope and fear. Hawk's F-15 descended toward the extraction point, slicing through the remnants of the storm. He maintained altitude and stability with a masterful balance of skill and instinct. And then, just as the helicopter's cables descended, ready to secure the jet, Hawk caught sight of something unexpected. On one of the F-35s, the pilot gave a subtle hand signal: recognition, respect, gratitude, but more than that, acknowledgement of who he truly was, a name and a call sign tied to classified operations, whose exploits were normally hidden from the world. Major Ryan "Hawk" Carter could feel the weight of the day pressing on him, not just physically but emotionally. The storm had relented just enough to reveal the calm corridor where the extraction helicopters hovered, their rotors thrashing against the turbulent air. Below, the survivors were finally out of immediate danger, clustered in rafts and rescue boats, but Hawk didn't relax. He knew better than anyone that nature had one last surprise waiting, and one mistake now could undo everything he had fought to achieve. He adjusted his F-15, angling the nose slightly downward for the final approach. The churning sea below reflected flashes of lightning still dancing across the dark sky, and Hawk's visor caught the flicker of the helicopter's spotlights through the rain. Every movement had to be flawless. A slight miscalculation in speed, angle, or turbulence could send him spinning into the storm. "Extraction team, confirm readiness." Hawk's voice was steady despite the storm's roar. "Ready and stable," came Vega's calm reply from the F-35 comms. "You're clear for pickup." Hawk exhaled slowly, centering himself. Training kicked in automatically. Years of simulated rescues, tactical maneuvers, and high-risk operations had prepared him for this moment. But this wasn't a simulation. 164 lives had already depended on him today. Now it was his own life at stake, and the weight of secrecy and recognition hung over him like a thundercloud. He lined up the approach. The F-15's engines roared as he cut through the gusts, and the helicopter's cables began to descend toward his aircraft. Hawk maintained perfect altitude and speed, using subtle adjustments to counteract rogue winds. The F-35s flanked him on either side, their pilots giving silent signals of support and acknowledgement, recognition of his call sign, something that was supposed to be classified. Hawk felt the tension coil tight in his chest. His call sign being recognized by the F-35s meant someone in operational command was aware of his identity. That awareness could be dangerous, but for now, survival took precedence. "Lower cables now," Vega instructed. Hawk adjusted the jet's position. Every second counted as the cables descended, ready to secure him for extraction. He could feel the vibration in the fuselage from the storm's remnants, feel the turbulent gusts trying to destabilize the plane. His fingers danced over the controls, keeping the aircraft steady while maintaining a safe alignment with the hovering helicopter. The first hook latched onto the F-15, jerking the aircraft slightly. Hawk compensated immediately, stabilizing the jet. The second hook followed. He could hear the strain in the cables, the groan of metal against metal, but the operation held. The extraction was underway. Suddenly, a rogue gust from the storm struck the bay with violent force. Hawk's heart pounded as he countered the turbulence, banking sharply to prevent the jet from swinging violently. The helicopter pilot shouted through the intercom, barely audible over the roar of engines and wind, "Steady, steady." Hawk's visor reflected flashes of lightning as he fought the air, muscles straining, mind calculating every micro-adjustment. The storm was relentless, a final test of his skill, endurance, and composure. For a moment, it felt as if the ocean itself were trying to reclaim him, to punish him for daring to defy its fury. Then, just as the turbulence seemed insurmountable, Hawk felt the cables tighten fully. The F-15 was secured, lifted gradually toward the helicopter. Relief surged, but he couldn't allow himself to celebrate. The storm could still turn, The aircraft could swing, or a rogue wave could strike the bay below. Every second demanded attention. The helicopter ascended steadily, carrying Hawk and the jet away from the storm-tossed bay. Through the visor, he watched the survivors below, now safe on rescue boats, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, disbelief, and gratitude. He felt a rare flicker of pride, quickly tempered by the operational reality he faced, the recognition of his call sign and the storm of consequences that might follow. Vega's voice came through the comms again, calm but serious. "Major Carter, you've done the impossible today. 164 lives saved. Call sign recognition aside, you've set a new standard for operational excellence." Hawk exhaled, tension coiling in his chest. "Understood. Extraction complete, heading for base." Even as the storm began to recede, Hawk's mind raced. Recognition of his call sign was not just an acknowledgement. It was a breach of secrecy that could have far-reaching consequences. Who had recognized him? How much did they know? And what would it mean for him after this mission, which would undoubtedly draw attention in ways he hadn't anticipated? The helicopter carried the F-15 and Hawk into calmer skies. Below, the survivors were being loaded onto larger ships and taken toward safety. For the first time in hours, Hawk allowed himself to notice the faces of those he had saved. Children clinging to parents, elderly citizens gripping hands, families embracing amid tears. Their survival was proof of his skill, courage, and composure under unimaginable pressure. Yet the operational side of his mission was far from over. Hawk's thoughts turned to the F-35 pilots who had recognized him and the implications of that recognition. He remembered Vega's calm, almost reverent tone. Someone had been watching this mission closely, someone who knew exactly who he was. Hawk adjusted his headset, speaking over the comms. "Vega, report on your squadron. Any anomalies? Anything we need to know regarding observation of this mission?" There was a brief pause. Then Vega responded carefully, "No anomalies beyond what we've discussed. Recognition was voluntary. Our pilots know your call sign, Major Carter, and respect your record. Operational protocols have been maintained." Hawk's jaw clenched. Respect was one thing, operational exposure was another. He knew that once news of this rescue reached command, questions would follow, and with questions would come scrutiny, investigation, and perhaps danger. His call sign was classified for a reason, and yet it had been recognized, publicly in the middle of a crisis, by pilots capable of identifying him instantly. The helicopter began its approach to base. Hawk's hands relaxed slightly, though his mind remained sharp. The storm had been a crucible, testing every skill he had honed over decades of flying and training. And now, as he prepared to land, he knew that the true storm, the one of recognition, inquiry, and consequence, was only just beginning. As the helicopter descended toward the landing pad, Hawk's mind replayed the mission. The initial storm intercept, the precise wake maneuvers, the emergency water landing, the evacuation of survivors, and the final extraction. Every moment had been a test of nerve, skill, and courage. Every moment had brought him closer to proving that one pilot could defy impossible odds and save hundreds of lives. Yet even in triumph, Hawk felt the weight of secrecy and consequence pressing down. The F-35 pilots above had seen him, recognized him, and now he knew the operational world would take notice. Major Ryan "Hawk" Carter stepped off the extraction helicopter, boots hitting the slick tarmac of the forward operating base. Rain still fell in scattered sheets, though the storm had finally begun to retreat. The roar of the F-15 engines and helicopter blades faded into a tense silence, punctuated only by the low hum of emergency generators and distant chatter from the control tower. Hawk's chest heaved, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He had done the impossible, saved 164 lives in a storm that could have swallowed them all. Yet, despite the relief, a new tension coiled in his gut. He glanced toward the F-35 circling overhead. Strike Leader Vega's pilots were still there, watching him carefully. Hawk knew that recognition of his call sign would bring consequences, questions, and perhaps scrutiny he had never faced in the field. Classified missions were meant to remain secret. He had just performed one of the most daring rescues in modern history, with witnesses who now knew exactly who he was. The rescue team began debriefing survivors as Hawk walked toward the operations tent. Families were embracing, tears flowing freely, gratitude and relief written on every face. Children clung to their parents, some parents weeping openly, overwhelmed by the ordeal they had endured. For a moment, Hawk let himself glimpse the impact of his actions. One elderly woman reached forward and grasped his hand, tears streaking her face. "Thank you for my grandchildren, for all of us," she whispered. Hawk nodded silently, allowing a small, tight-lipped smile. Words felt unnecessary. He had not saved them for recognition or praise, he had done it because he could, and because someone had to. Yet there was no time for celebration. The operational world waited. As Hawk passed through the base, officers approached, faces a mixture of awe, respect, and controlled urgency. His phone buzzed with incoming secure messages from command, red-coded, classified, and urgent. He entered the operations tent, where strike leader Vega was already waiting. The pilot's expression was neutral but unreadable, a practiced mask that concealed the underlying acknowledgement of Hawk's skill. "Major Carter," Vega began, "I need a full operational debrief. And be aware, your call sign exposure has been noted at the highest levels." Hawk's jaw tightened. "I understand. The mission was executed flawlessly. 164 lives saved. All survivors are stable and all tactical protocols were maintained, aside from the recognition issue." Vega nodded, leaning back slightly. "Correct, but you must understand your call sign being recognized changes everything. Protocols require a review. Certain personnel in strategic command are aware of your actions today. Some may question how you operated independently in a high-risk scenario. Others may see this as unprecedented heroism. Either way, you'll need to answer to them." Hawk exhaled slowly. He had trained for years to remain calm under pressure, to navigate impossible situations with precision. But the recognition of his identity added a new layer of complication. This mission would be scrutinized, studied, and dissected. His classified status now intersected with undeniable heroism. He took a moment to collect his thoughts. The storm had been defeated, the survivors were safe, but a new storm, political, operational, and personal, was gathering. Then the door to the operations tent opened and a senior officer stepped in. Cold, deliberate, and commanding, the officer's gaze fixed on Hawk. "Major Carter," he said, voice clipped and authoritative. "We have been briefed. Your actions today are extraordinary. However, the exposure of your call sign raises questions. You will provide a full account to the Strategic Operations Council." Hawk nodded, expression neutral, masking the tension under years of discipline. "Understood, sir. I am prepared to provide all necessary reports and analysis." The officer's gaze lingered, assessing, measuring, before he finally nodded and exited. Hawk exhaled again. The weight of the day pressed down upon him. The storm he had faced at 30,000 feet was over, but the consequences of being recognized in a classified operation were just beginning. Outside, the survivors were being flown to safety aboard transport aircraft and helicopters. Hawk watched the last of the rafts being lifted from the bay, and for the first time allowed himself a deep, unguarded breath. The relief on their faces, the gratitude in their eyes, reminded him why he had done this, not for recognition, not for medals, but for the simple, profound act of saving lives. As the helicopters lifted off, Hawk's phone buzzed again. A secure message from command flashed across the screen. "Major Carter, your heroism has been noted at the highest levels. Prepare for a classified commendation. Full debrief scheduled. Additional instructions to follow." Hawk allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. The recognition would come, even if it was hidden behind layers of secrecy. The lives he saved today would be remembered in ways that the public might never know. He looked up at the sky, still streaked with clouds and the fading remnants of lightning. The storm had passed, and with it, the immediate danger. But Hawk knew that life as he had known it would never be the same. The exposure of his call sign, the heroic rescue, and the resulting recognition, both public and classified, had changed everything. Strike Leader Vega approached, helmet under arm, expression unreadable. "You did more than anyone could have expected," Vega said quietly. "And yes, people know who you are now. That knowledge, it's a double-edged sword." Hawk nodded. "I understand. My priority was saving lives. Everything else is secondary, but I'll face whatever comes next." Vega gave a small, respectful nod. "Good. Just know, you've set a standard today. People will be talking about this mission for years, even if they don't know your name." Hawk let the weight of that sink in. Years of training, experience, and risk had culminated in a single, high-stakes moment of courage. And though his identity had been exposed, the mission's success, the survival of 164 souls, was undeniable. The final moments of the day were quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the tarmac slick and reflective. Hawk watched the F-15 being towed back to its hangar, knowing that the jet had been a lifeline, a guardian angel in the hands of a pilot willing to risk everything. He allowed himself a final glance at the horizon. The storm was over, the survivors were safe, and the impossible had been achieved. Yet the coming days promised scrutiny, recognition, and the unrelenting attention of those in strategic command. Hawk's life, once defined by secrecy and action, was now intersecting with visibility and consequence. But as he walked toward the base operations building, shoulders square, jaw set, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had done the right thing. He had saved 164 lives, and in the end, that was worth every risk, every second of terror, and every challenge he had faced at 30,000 feet.